So I'm going to read. It looks like TikTok is still TikTok until further notice. So here I am. Now follow me on YouTube, by the way. This is where you're going to find a lot of my work, a lot of my talks. I want to read to you from the first Templar nation about the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars are very quickly and closely connected with the Cathars, and they are definitely connected with Mary of Magdalene and the Grail. And so I'm going to read a little bit about, what the book talks about. Again, it's called The First Templar Nation by Freddy Silva. He's one of the great esoteric scholars that he's incredible. Like, I damn near have every one of his fucking books. He's amazing. So let me go ahead and read to you the back of the cover, and we'll read. We're going to skip along. I kind of prepared a little bit, not much, but let's go. Conventional history claims that 9 men formed a brotherhood called the Knights Templars in Jerusalem in 1118 to provide protection for pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Overturning this long-established historical narrative, Freddy Silva shows that the Order of the Temple existed a decade earlier on the opposite side of Europe, that the protection of... the other side of Europe, that the protection of pilgrims was entrusted to a separate organization, and that in league with the Cistercian monks and the equally mysterious Order of Sion, the Templars executed one of history's most daring and covert plans, the creation of Europe's first nation-state, Portugal, with one of their own as a king. Including over 700 references, many from new and rare sources, Silva reveals Portugal, not Jerusalem, as the first Templar stronghold. And by the way, I've seen his interviews on this, and the fact is he was raised in Portugal, in a little island or something of that nature, and so he grew up speaking Portuguese. That was his first mother tongue. And so when he started studying a lot of the documents in cursive, by the way, obviously, which is a real important thing that you teach your kids how to read cursive. It's very, very important because all the ancient documents are in cursives. So if you can't read cursives, you're kind of fucked. So not only does he know Portuguese, but he also knows cursive, obviously. And he was able to excavate documents never before understood. So your supposed experts on the Knights Templars don't know shit when you compare it with what he's come out with. So including over 700 references, many from new and rare sources, Silva reveals Portugal, not Jerusalem, as the first Templar stronghold. He shows how there were 11 founding members and how the first king of Portugal, a secret Templar, was related to Bernard de Clairvaux, head of the Cistercian, Cistercian. The author explains the Templars' motivation to create a country far from the grasp of Rome, where they would conduct their living resurrection initiations, whose candidates were declared risen from the dead. A secret for which the church silenced millions, and which the Templars protected to the death. So let me just say that moving out of so let's put some timelines. So Mary Magdalene, from everything we know, flees Jerusalem, after either Yeshua is with her, right, literally with her, but broken. They were able to heal him, and again, the body is no longer in the crypt, and the pharaohs and the Romans are freaking the fuck out. Where's the body? So they have to escape. We don't honestly know whether or not she's pregnant at the time, or when he's put on the cross, or if she gets pregnant later. We don't know. We actually don't. But what we do know is that she lands in France. And what we do know is that the Knights Templars were the true Christians. And I'll tell you why. And they understood magic, and they understood alchemy, which would have been even more intensely enforced when they go to the Middle East, which is Jerusalem. When they come across things that the Catholic Church either has in its vault when they did the infamous Friday the 13th of the slaughters of the Knights Templars later on. I think it's 13 something. I forgot exactly when. Or they foolishly burned and destroyed any evidence of them, of their books. Okay, so let's continue. So let's continue what they're saying. Placing the intrepid knights in a previously unknown time and place, Silva's historical narrative reveals the Portuguese roots of key founding members, their relationship with the Order of Sion, the Templars' unshakable devotion to Mary Magdalene and John the Baptist, and how they protected a holy bloodline in Portugal. He also provides evidence of secret Templar holy sites, initiation chambers, and hidden passageways throughout Portugal, often coinciding with pagan and Neolithic temples, and explains how their most important site forms a perfect triangle with the Abbey of Mount Sion in Jerusalem and the Osiris, did you hear this? The Osiris Temple in Egypt. Now, why would they love and revere and protect Mary Magdalene? Did you hear what I just said? I said Osiris Temple in Egypt, because she was, and we are finally realizing she was a high Templar priestess of Isis. So that's why. So she knew things that these Abrahamic religions, right, Judeo-Christian, didn't fucking know to that level. And certainly it was not allowed for women to have access to that information in certain parts of the world. So why would Western bred men, right, Western world, have such reverence for a woman who would have been, let's be honest, okay, Palestinian, okay, Judaism is a religion, Palestinian, Arabic, Semitic, it's a bloodline, okay? I mean, I don't know, you know, like you could be Norwegian and Buddhist, okay? It doesn't mean you're from China or Nepal or India or whatever. It doesn't, okay? And we need to kind of think about how we see religion and how it's not connected to your race at all. All right, so I'm going to read some of these things because when I first heard him being interviewed, one of his first books I ever bought from him was The Crop Circles, which I think that was one of his first books. So let's begin with page 1, only because it talks about how they received Portugal. Okay, so let me read it to you because this is important. So, okay, the year is 1125, an oak table in a large hall in a small county named Portugale. The aged vellum parchment is a donation of a small town near the city of Braga. It reads, I, Queen di Terari, give to God and the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, the village called Fonte Arcada, with all its rights and benefits for the good of my soul. The generous donation includes no less than 17 additional land grants by local families, meticulously written in pen and ink. It is signed, I, Guillermo, procurator of the temple in this territory, received these documents. The signatory holds the key to a mystery. As procurator of the temple, Guillermo Ricard is invested with the power and authority to conduct transaction on behalf of the Grand Master of the Knights Templar in Jerusalem, Hugues de Payan. But he is much more than that. His name appears on a second grant, this time as Magistra Donas Ricardus, for half of the estate of Villa Nova, donated by Afonso Anes to God and the Brotherhood of the Knights Templars. The Guillermo Ricard is also the first master of the Knights Templar in a small county named Portugale. These events are extraordinary because the year is 1125. And no members of the Knights Templars are known to exist outside of Jerusalem. Least of all in a region on the opposite side of Europe. Stranger still, in 1111, did you hear that? In 1111, 7 years before the Templar Brotherhood came into existence, the Knights were awarded a strategic property in the same territory. These three things are certain. 1. The Knights Templars pledge allegiance not to the Pope, but to an influential monk in the French county of Champagne. 2. In a document addressing the Templars, a young man destined to be king of a land that will be known as Portugal reveals that within your brotherhood and all of your works, I am your brother. And 3, during interrogation by the Holy Inquisition, a Templar knight made a cryptic statement: there exists in the order a law so extraordinary, on which such secrets should be kept, that any knight would prefer his head cut off rather than reveal it to anyone. And virtually all captured Templars proved this by being burnt alive at the stake. What follows is the true and untold story behind the first Templar nation. Now, I found out, I just got chills reading this. Chills. Wow. 1095, November, in the Auvergne, a mountainous region in central France. The growing assembly of abbots, bishops, and archbishops, princes, nobles, lords, and laymen gathered inside the great church hall in Clermont and awaited the arrival of the Pope. When they finally caught sight of his tonsured head ambling down the aisle, it was clear that Urban II was less than happy. The long year of touring had carried the pontiff to several French and Mediterranean regions, then to northern Italy, where an ecclesiastical conclave at Piacenza tested his patience, and the results were far from what he had expected. And besides, Piacenza in the spring had been far more climatically rewarding than the bitter November cold of Clermont, and in this, the year of our Lord 1095. Urban II rose from his seat and addressed the council, beginning with his report on the church's situation in the Near East. Aside from the problem of Seljuk Turks having overturned Asia Minor and seizing control of much of the Levant, including the city of Jerusalem, these troublesome people had also shut off access to the Christian holy places, contrary to their more tolerant Arab predecessors. Did you hear that? To their more tolerant Arab predecessors. And he was not finished. Urban also had a problem with the Christians. He had seen clerics trafficking in church property, nobles and monarchs at home and abroad, who, wallowing in luxury, constantly violated the laws of the church on peace by picking fights with Arabs purely for material gain. And as for their knights, well, they were behaving more like mercenaries. After his rants, some would argue a justifiable one, Urban worked up enough zeal among the assembled throng to initiate a crusade and reclaim the Christian holy place from the infidels, and thus channel all this destructive energy into something worth fighting for. I, or rather the Lord, beseech you, as Christ's heralds, to publish this everywhere, and to pursue all people of whatever rank, foot soldier and knights, poor and rich, to carry aid promptly to those Christians, and to destroy that vile race from the land of our friends. I say this to those who are present. It is meant also for those who are absent. Moreover, Christ commands it. Christ commands it. Having warmed up the Pope, then made his way out of the church, ascended a wooden platform, and began to address an even larger gathering, whose numbers had strained the available meeting area of the Champette, and the services the town were also to provide. This land, which you inhabit, shut in all sides by the seas, and surrounded by the mountain peaks, is too narrow for your large population, nor does it abound in wealth, and it is furnished scarcely enough food for its cultivators. Hence it is that you murder one another, that you wage war, and that you frequently perish by mutual wounds. Let therefore hatred depart from among you. Let your quarrel end. Let wars cease, and let all dissensions and controversies slumber. Enter upon the road to the holy sepulchre, where rests that land from the wicked race, and subject it to yourselves. God has conferred upon you, above all nations, great glory and arms. Accordingly, undertake this journey for the remission of your sins, with the assurance of the imperishable glory of the kingdom of heaven. That's always the promise. Shouts of "De vue, de vue" rose agreeably above the frozen fields of Clermont. God wills, God wills. And soon this would fester into a purulent propaganda slogan for the recruitment of thousands of foot soldiers. Despite the languid air, Urban's motivational speech seemed to be having a far more resuscitating effect that had in the past in Piacenza. So he continued with an added flourish of rabble rousing. They overturn and desecrate our altars. They will take a Christian, cut open his stomach, and tie his intestines to a stake, then stabbing at him with a spear. They will make him run until he pulls out his own entrails and falls dead on the ground. The Pope then employed bait, guaranteeing to rally the swelling of participants to his cause. Have you heard this kind of propaganda machine before? This sounds familiar, doesn't it? All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. This I grant them through the power of God with which I have invested. Oh, what a disgrace if such despised and base race which worships demons should conquer a people which has the faith of omnipotent God and is made glorious with the name of Christ. I could go on, but you get the picture. I'm going to skip because we have better things to read right now. But what does it sound like? Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? 1119, Temple Mount, a tunnel 80 feet beneath. Did you hear that? A tunnel 80 feet beneath. You know those tunnels they've always talked about? They had tunnels in 1119. Let's continue, though. Even for a night, it was hard work picking away at the limestone and debris of 1,000 years of accumulated civilization beneath Saqqara, the sacred rock over which so much blood had been spilled, all in the name of a formless deity. Twice did Hugh de Panier journey to Jerusalem to access the prohibition of locating an object relating to this cause. But now the Knights Templars were more than convinced they were on the right course of action. Even common sense dictates that the story of 9 knights patrolling 33 miles of road between Jaffa and Jerusalem to protect thousands of pilgrims from brigands, thieves, Saracens, and mountain lions is a preposterous idea. One giant medieval smokescreen. Even Fulk the Schacht, the king of Jerusalem's chronicle, never portrayed the Knights Templars acting as policemen for pilgrims, probably because security was already performed by the Knights Hospitallers. The Hospitallers' initial duty was to defend and care for visiting pilgrims upon being granted official status in 1113 by papal bull. Their names also expanded to the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, named not for John the Baptist, as one would assume, but in memory of Jean l'Aumônier, a Cypriot noble who, after his wife's death, gave away all his worldly goods to the poor, rose to the rank of Bishop of Alexandria, and became a model of exemplary charity. Thus, the Knights Hospitaliers adopted as their patron saint a man who devoted his life to helping others. Their association with John the Baptist stems from their hostelry, having been built on the ruin of his former church. A rule of conduct was drawn up by their Grand Master, the Knight Raymond de Puy, which did not include military arms, but by the mid-12th century, by order of the Pope, the military spirit superseded their original charitable function, much to the chagrin of the members. Rather than ministering to the pilgrims of the Holy Land, the core members of the Knights Templar spend their first 7 years sequestered away in Solomon's stables, armed with picks and shovels, stubbornly refusing admission to the site to anyone outside their inner brotherhood. But in 1121, something changed that led one of the founding Templars, Godfrey de Saint-Omer, to return to Flanders armed with scrolls. 1147, Braga, Galdino Paez also moves into his new domicile. Let me see if I'm going to read this. No, I'm going to skip. I'm going to go into more. I want to kind of explain why I'm reading some of this, like here and there, because I found it interesting that that we, when shit started exploding in that part of the world, that we were told that these tunnels, apparently there were tunnels in the in the 12th century. So there you go. Right beneath Mount, the Mount, whatever it's called. Okay, I'm going to skip. We're going to go right into something else that I think is going to interest you to some level. Bear with me. Hang on. Let me make sure, because I want to start it in the right way. Yeah, I'm going to start it here. Egyptians concealed mysteries that were above the capacity of the common herd under the veil of religious rites and hieroglyph symbols. Newton was a prolific writer, a member of a Masonic-style institution, and alleged Grand Master of the Prieur de Sion, the name by which the Altar de Sion became known after 1188, following a historically documented ceremony. Given the association between these fraternities and the Knights Templars, it is revealed that when Newton's hitherto unknown private manuscript came to light, the economist John Maynard Keynes commented on the significance of Newton's sources, and in so doing so may have revealed the kind of knowledge the Templars and Bernard de Clairvaux had been privy to. He saw the whole universe and all that it is in as a riddle, as a secret, which could be read by applying pure thought to certain evidence, certain mystic clues which God had hid among the world to allow a sort of philosopher's treasure hunt to the esoteric brotherhood. He believed that there were clues to be found in certain papers and traditions handed down by the brethren in an unbroken chain back to the original cryptic revelations. During their formative years in Jerusalem, the Templars would have had time to absorb local esoteric influences, particularly those from the descendants of a group of Gnostics called the Sabaeans, who compiled a great hermetic book on magic called Geyat al-Hakim, the goal of the wise. That's the translation. This valuable work was translated to Latin in Moorish Spain during the same period the Templars were settling down in Portugal. It was renamed Picatrice, much like the Templar scroll decrypted by Lambert de Saint-Omer. It is to contain a blueprint for the Ethiopian Hermetic City. That caught my eye, along with 224 manuscripts on Hermeticism, Kabbalah, astrology, magic, and alchemy. The kind of tome one would dedicate 7 quiet years in Jerusalem to read, absorb, and understand. Not surprisingly, it is considered one of the most exhaustive works on talismanic magic in existence. The Sabaeans were an Arabic sect living in Haran, a province in modern-day southeast Turkey, and not far from some of the world's oldest sacred sites. Sabaeans come from listen to this, Sa-ba-ia, star people. They venerated the moon, symbol of Jitu, Jehuti, and were known to have undertaken yearly pilgrimage to the Giza Plateau to conduct astronomical observations, recognizing the pyramids as monuments mirroring the stars, which ultimately proved to be correct deductions. Derived from the word Sabayat, again, which means star people, is the Portuguese word sabia, scholars. It is so now it morphs into from Sabaia, star people, to sabia in Portuguese, which would have meant scholars. It is an extension, and its extensions are saber, knowledge, and sabidoria, wisdom. Where did the Sabian acquire their knowledge? After the library and light of Alexandria were extinguished at the end of the 4th century AD by a rampaging mob of Christian fundamentalists who were not much fun but certainly very mental, the knowledge moved north to Edessa and then to Haran, where an academy was established to enable the Hermetic teaching of alchemy and symbolism to permeate the Islamic world and, by extension, the area in and around Jerusalem. Let's pause. Now, he has a pretty intense index of his research, by the way. And I'm pretty sure that most fans of the Knights Templars. And for women, many of us as women, we are fans of the Knights Templars, but because we realized that these were warrior monks who revered and protected the Grail, aka Mary of Magdalene. That's when men were men. That's when men revered the high priestess. They were still warriors, they were still men, but they revered the high priestess. And that's what we've lost in this century. That's what we've lost in the last 2,000 years. I'd say 3,000 years. But there were pockets. And when these men revered the feminine, which the Chartres Cathedral outside of Paris, 50 kilometers from Paris, was built by the Knights Templars in obedience to the Madonna, to Mary of Magdalene. Okay? Alchemy comes from the Arabic al-chem. The word alchemy comes from, I'm going to repeat it. Alchemy comes from the Arabic al-chem. And chem is spelled K-H-E-M. Ironically, the old name for Egypt, al-chem. That's right. So to practice alchemy is to know matter that comes from Egypt. The Greeks acknowledged their gratitude to the Egyptian mysteries by calling that land Kemet, or Kemia, the art of transmuting an ordinary metal into gold, except that the esoteric world, such alchemy, has little to do with transforming minerals at all, to do with altering the individual through knowledge, and when such a person is transformed into gold, so it is said that he or she is risen from the dead. It's killing the ego. It's actually an ego death. Old Tamara would have been an ideal place to drink or imbibe such knowledge. The town's oldest known iteration is Atamarma, an Arabic word meaning sweet waters, a description of the river flowing through it. The Templars adapted the names to Tamar, and it is a play on words in Portuguese, for it literally means to drink, to imbibe, to ingest. For the Templars then, Tomas was Sabedoria, the location where wisdom is to be imbibed. Although I have not found the central item on my agenda, namely the Chamber of Mysteries under the Rotunda, I was satisfied with the amount of surviving evidence in support of its existence, and all that around the Rotunda's periphery remain enough signs pointing to something of a great import having been taught here, generation after generation, enough to warn the Arab Caliph Yak al-Mansur and his 1,000,000-man army to come looking for it. Perhaps he too was searching for this grail. After all, the rambunctious Arab leader came from the same time and place where Picatrice was translated. All these possibilities rumbled through my mind as I passed the time beneath a group of mature trees on the hill overlooking Thomas, waiting for an early evening rainstorm to conclude its business. Below, the octagonal Gothic tower of the Church of John the Baptist, built on the site of a former temple of forgotten provenances, rose above the road, tops like a needle emerging from its square stone box. The castle gates closed for the day, and behind them the enchantment of the rotunda, whose invisible arms refused to soften their clasp, as though another element of this Templar mystery was hiding in plain sight. Like the Sphinx on the Giza Plateau, the rotunda and its adjacent chapel expectantly points to an object of distant significance besides the rising sun. The access through these buildings is offset by a few imperceptible degrees from true east. It is this invisible line it extends into the Plaza of Tamar, to the bell tower of the Church of John the Baptist, and specifically to a small pyramidal bas relief along its foundation. People walk by this strange carving every day. They snap pictures, but no one has the slightest idea why it's there or what it means. The well-worn relic depicts a sapling out of which sprouts a fleur de lis. A dog and a lion stand on either side. If it were an ancient Egyptian dog, would represent Cyrus. The dog sat, the embodiment of knowledge. The lion would be Regulus. Okay, got it. the brightest star in the constellation of Leo, referred to as the royal star, which has long been described as a gateway to the records of all knowledge, the key to the mysteries. Vedic astronomer identifies Regulus with the summer solstice, thus associating it with John the Baptist. In Sanskrit, they call, bear with me, they call star Magha the mighty one, which are derived from the word Magi, and the title Magha, as in Magda elder, as in Mary Magdalena. Like threading a needle, the line bisects two columns inside the church, each bearing effigies of a dragon and a green man, respectively. Then it extends straight as an arrow for 2,886 miles until it strikes a hill bearing a remarkable similarity to Tomar and its rotunda, the Abbey de Notre-Dame de Mont Sion. It's interesting how, it's funny how we don't, these Knights Templars understood sacred geometry. They understood the kind of mysticism that certain types that control this planet right now either have access to, own, or have access to. Do you understand? And so what they were able to do for thousands of years is literally, how do I put it? Cement our innate ability to forget, to suffer amnesia of our origins as starseeds. Because our origins, for many of us, it's a truth. We're starseeds. We began our incarnations not on this planet, but on other planets. And the Knights Templars remembered all of it. But like us, they were in a dense planet. Imagine 7-dimensional consciousness beings stuck in 3D bodies, having to navigate with 3D worlds. And in a sense, that's what I get with the Knights Templars. I get a sense of these men who understood Mary Magdalene's importance and her daughter, and some people say there were many other children. What we do know is there was one daughter. We do know that, okay? And everyone else saying they had tons of kids, we don't know that, okay? But we do know the one. And I feel as if when we look at these men and we really take the time to learn what they were about and what they suffered, at the end, what they suffered was unfucking unmentionable. You understand? They weren't greedy bankers. That's a lie. Perpetrated by the winners. Perpetrated by the Catholic Church. They weren't greedy bankers. They were alchemists who knew how to bring about material wealth to build structures, to build chateaus so that they could archive their findings, to have, do you understand what we're going to do? Live in a fucking tent? So yeah, they had money to build places to archive. And I believe, and this is and I'm going to continue reading in a minute, and I believe that some of this still, much of it is still buried in Portugal and parts of France. Because I think at some point, once they realized that they were fucked. If remember, we had men in that time period, you had two things going on: pigeons, messenger pigeons, and hawkers, right? They all had hawks, peregrine falcons, things, like raptors that could be used to communicate with each other, highly trained. And so once the massacre began, many of them would have done anything to start burying ancient relics and knowledge and books to make sure it was safe, because they knew what was coming. But anyway, let me continue, because I think this is important. Okay, let's start here. The Portuguese word tabuleiro means tray, and the feast shares many similarities with the Ethiopian feast of Timbuk, a celebration practiced since the time when Menelik placed the ark in the church of Our Lady Mary of Sion. During Timbuk, the priest balances on their heads a tray called tabutat, and that word shares the same etymological roots as Tabulero. How did Ethiopians come to Portugal? 1153 Gossip in the alleyways of Jerusalem. Stories of the existence of Ethiopian ruler named Presbyter John had been circulating around the city for 8 years now. Galdino Paes recently arrived from Portugal to join the newly appointed Templar Grand Masters André de Montard, who would have been privy to these rumors, even though he would return to his native land by the time envoys representing this king finally arrived to request an altar in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre from the Patriarch of Jerusalem. Seeing as the Ethiopian king was a direct descendant of the Magi, who are mentioned in the Gospel, and one of the leaders of that sect had been a grandfather to Mary of Magdalene. The request was granted in 1177. Pilgrims describes the monks and priests in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at the time as Copts, Egyptian Christians from the city of Alexandria. A century passes and the story picks up in Bavaria when a writer by the name of Albrecht von Scharfenberg adds the final component to the Grail legend originally begun by Chrétien de Troyes. In it, he mentions the final resting place of the Ark as the land of a priest-king nicknamed Prester John. Although in that kingdom is eventually identified as Ethiopia, never did the Ethiopians refer to their king by that name. Prester John was an unfortunate artifact of translation, Prester being a contradiction of the Latin Pretisus, exalted, while John was in actual fact pronounced Giam, with a G-Y-A-M, Giam, which is in Ethiopian means powerful. Ethiopia had a long tradition of black female monarchs who were often referred to as virgin queens. They ruled a vast empire stretching along the Nile through Egypt and all the way to the Mediterranean, covering parts of Eritrea, Nubia, Yemen, and southern Arabia. It was a province considered as large as India, and so much so that cartographers often confuse the two. The focal center of the kingdom was Medo, an ancient city on the eastern bank of the Nile, centered on an area preceded by no less than 200, did you hear that, pyramids. Mero inevitably brings up connotations with Merovingian, the holy bloodline of Trojan kings and the line of King David and Solomon, which reemerged in Central Europe around the 5th century AD with Merovesh, king of the Franks, whose territory included the Duchy of Burgundy. The focal point of these connections is Solomon and his lover, the Queen Sheba. The Queen of Sheba bore the title Makeda, or as it appears in the Middle East, Magda, as in Magdalena. The attributes translate as magnificent one. In Arabia, Sheba is Saba and may be linguistically linked to the Sabaeans, the Gnostic sect who once migrated from Ethiopia around 690 BC. In Ethiopian history, this consort of King Solomon was addressed as Negesta Sabia, with the word Sabia surviving intact in the Portuguese language and meaning a wise woman. The curiosity of the Knights Templars led them to trace the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant to the Queen of Sheba's former kingdom, because around 1188, Emperor Lalibela of Ethiopia is said to have given them permission to build a round church in this land. This they did, and they progressed to create 11 other carved entirely out of the volcanic bedrock, one of them in the shape of a Templar cross. An eyewitness account describes how some of the churches hid in the open mouth of huge quarried caves, connecting them all in a complex and bewildering labyrinth of tunnels and narrow passageways, which offset crypts and grottos and galleries. A subterranean world, shaded and damp, silent before the faint echoes of distant footfalls as priests and deacons go about their timeless business. The Emperor Lalibela was somehow involved with a holy bloodline lies in the nature of his name, which literally translate as the bees recognizing his sovereignty. The bee being the adopted symbol of Merovingian through centuries. Like other Ethiopian monarchs, Lalibela also held the title Negusi, Shion, or King of Sion. Thus, he may have been involved with the Order of Sion in Jerusalem, given its original and relationship with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, he's not saying that Sheba is Mary of Magdalene. He's saying that it's connected to the concept of the wise woman. It's a name. Okay? So, again, the book I'm reading from, and it's an important book, is The First Templar Nation by Freddy Silva. It's under the concept of secret societies, right? There are people today that actually think they're the descendants of the Knights Templars, and it's the farthest from the truth. It is their self-importance. They do not at all reflect the real Knights Templars who had honor, integrity, and revered the sacred feminine. The men that call themselves Knight Templars today are frauds. I call it out. I don't give a shit. 3.5 centuries passes, and the story picks up again in the 16th century when unusual processional staffs are witnessed in Ethiopia's Coptic Christian community. One comprises a large central cross identical in design to the first dynasty Portuguese temple cross, while the other bears the unmistakable emblem of the Templar cross, surmounted with the fleur de lis, emblem of the Portuguese order of, let me turn the page, of Avis, the splinter Templar group created by Alfonso Enriquez, whose leader was the king's brother, Don Pedro. All of this is most odd. How did the Portuguese Templars become involved in remote Ethiopia, especially since the entire order had supposedly been extinguished 2 centuries earlier through Europe by the order of the Pope? Apparently, most of the shit we've been taught is a complete lie, like usual. Let me read this because this is actually around. So what had happened, I don't know if you know that I've read some parts on the Cathars. The Cathars were Gnostic people who lived in France, again, and who revered Mary of Magdalene, who probably had been trained. They were all probably descendants of having been trained by Mary Magdalene, trained, so forth, so on. And they were slaughtered in the 1300s. All of them, men, women, and children, except for some of the children that could survive or did survive. The Knights Templars took those orphan boys and brought them into the order of the Brotherhood of the Knights Templars, just on the side note. So I'm just putting that together. But let me read this. 1312, southern Portugal, the Templars enjoy a 6-year vacation. With the Inquisition taking root in Spain, Pope Clement V issued the bull Regnas in Coles, ordering the Portuguese monarch to investigate the Knights Templars in neighboring Portugal. It had been 5 years since orders were issued on the night of October 13th to address all Templars and confiscate their property. The Pope's actions sought to extinguish the Templars' power along with their secret teachings for the obvious reason that both were undermining the authority, did you hear that, of the Church. Undermining the authority of the Church. So they didn't just do it to the Knights Templars, who were clearly powerful, I'm just going to call them powerful, magical shamans. I'm just going to say warrior shamans. But they had also destroyed the Cathars, who were like, seriously, poor people. They had no money. They would preach in, say, the outdoors, or in a barn, or in someone's house. There was no money. They wore whatever they had on their backs. So Pope Clement also ordered their slaughter. And here he is ordering the slaughter of the Knights Templars, who unfortunately are known as greedy bankers, and it's a lie. So let me continue. The second party to the issuing of arrests was the French king Philippe le Bel, who was merely keen to get his hands on their vast wealth, seeing as he had amassed a colossal debt in unpaid loans from the Templars. There was also that small grievance he harbored After requesting admittance into their inner brotherhood, but being as honest as a 3 libra note, the Templars flatly refused him. King Dinis of Portugal did not accept the Pope's accusation. In fact, his reaction to the pontiff's letter requesting the Templars' imprisonment was derisory. Nevertheless, Dinis paid lip service and requested the Archbishop of Lisbon to look into the charges by way of procedure. Predictably, the Archbishop found no wrongdoing, and the king exonerated the Templars. 4 quiet years passed, and the Portuguese Templars remained unmolested. So an understandably fuming Pope Clement pushed the issue with a follow-up bull, Va en excesso, this time suppressing the Templar order and ordering all Templar assets to be handed over to the Hospitaliers, who had since been reorganized into a military arm of the Catholic Church, with notable sections in Portugal and Scotland, where they all cooperated with the Templars and generally pursued their original charitable aim. Dinis, the farmer king, and his queen Isabel were stout proponents of the Cistercian model and encouraged its ideal and practices through their reign. Under pressure, Dinis resonated with Rome that the Templars had simply been granted perpetual use of lands that actually belonged to the Portuguese crown. When the ruse fell to convince the king, summoned the Templars to his court to explain another cunning plan. What happened next ranks as one of the history's biggest practical jokes. Dinis proposed the Templars transfer their entire assets to the Portuguese crown, then take a sabbatical in the Algarve. In the meantime, a letter would be issued to the Pope indicating the order of the temple in Portugal had ceased to exist. The Templars packed their belongings, left Tomar for Castro, Marem, and laid low for a while, but to prove old habits die hard, they established the town's municipal day on June 24th, the feast day of John the Baptist. 6 years later, on the Feast of the Assumption, the same day, Godefroy de Bouillon marched to Jerusalem. The ex-Templars returned from their extended vacation and met with the king to discover he had rebranded the Knights Templars as the Order of Christ. All former Templars were now members of this order, and all their former holdings and funds were transferred intact. In a manner of speaking, the Knights Templars died and were raised from the dead. All knights remained unscathed in Portugal and in Scotland too, where many persecuted French Templars were given safe harbor by King Robert the Bruce, rebranding themselves as Scottish Rite Freemasons. Back in Tomar, the new Order of Christ returned to its objective and developed a strange alliance bordering on obsession with Ethiopia. Ethiopia was a kingdom on the other side of the world and required a considerable effort to reach. It offered no obvious financial incentives to anyone willing to make the perilous journey. It was a land to which, up to that period, no known maritime route was known. But the Portuguese persevered, and with 2 exceptions, all known early visitors to Ethiopia were Portuguese. Why should the Templars' Order of Christ develop this irrational obsession? A century later, in 1452, a group of Coptic emissaries arrived in Lisbon to meet with the new king, Alfonso V. Shortly after, the king published an unusual book called Arter Magna, an alchemical treatise in which he mentions having been initiated into the magical arts by a man of knowledge who came from the land of Egypt and taught him the secrets of what by then had become known as the Stone of Philosophy. Remember the Philosopher's Stone? Formerly known as the Stones of Testimony, the very same ones associated with the Ark of the Covenant. Whereby the 2 events are related or not, the truth is that 2 years after the meeting, the enlightened Alfonso V granted spiritual jurisdiction over Ethiopia to the Order of Christ. These same emissaries then spent a considerable time in the company of the king's uncle, Infanta Don Enrique, or Henry the Navigator, as he is most famously known, Grand Master of the rebranded Order of Christ and the mind behind Portugal's unprecedented maritime achievement, which he oversaw from his office adjacent to the Rotunda. So, it's good to hear that, because I'm putting it together, it's good to hear that what was slaughtered was the French Templars, right? And many of them would have escaped in Portugal, and they would have grabbed some of the kids who had survived the slaughters of the Cathar kids. I'm just going to call them the Cathars, the orphans of the Cathar slaughters, and would have brought them to Portugal. And this incredible connection with Ethiopia, which, by the way, I remember seeing a documentary, a couple actually, that talk about that there is a stone structure where the Ark of the Covenant is said to lie. And there are men that literally they'll spend their entire life, just one man, I believe it's just one man, will spend his entire life protecting it. And when he dies, the honor to protect the Ark of the Covenant is handed. It's like passing the baton to a new person who volunteers their life to protecting the Ark of the Covenant. A lot of people don't believe it's there. A lot of people think it's a lie. And to be honest, it could be. It could actually be a ploy. Because if it was there by now, knowing how the governments work, let's be honest, they would have fucking stolen it a long time ago. I mean, remember it's mentioned in Indiana Jones, the Ark of the Covenant. Remember that? The Germans were very interested in that. By the way, the Germans were very, very interested in magic and the esoterics. And there was some incredible knowledge about how they studied portals and aeronautics through UFOs. It's discussed. And the Russians were in fact, when the Russians abolished religions, I don't know if you know that, there were two things you could smuggle into Russia in the 70s, 60s, 70s, was Levi jeans and the Bible. That's very much desired. Those two were the desired items. But anyway, during that time, they were doing a lot of studies, and still do, in the esoterics and the spiritual and the metaphysical. So I find that interesting. I'm going to go ahead and see if you have any questions. And I'm going to pick up from where I'm going to pick up to another book and look at what I can read on the actual Cathars. I think it's a good idea to go there right now. Hang on, okay? I'm going to see what I can... You know what? I'm going to go to the beginning so that you understand what the hell the Cathars are in the first place. Okay? I'm going to read it again. I think I've read it before. I think. I might not have. The Emergence of the Cathars, page 24. This book, by the way, is called The Cathars, Their History and Myth Reveal. Sean Martin wrote this book. And let me look at page 24. Here we go. After its first recorded appearance in Germany in 1134, the Cathars' move spread rapidly. It quickly became established in northern Italy and in the Languedoc region of southwest France. Heresy seems to have died down in the second half of the 11th century. This was possibly related to a program of church reform initiated by Pope Leo IX, 1049 to 1054, and continued by Gregory VII, 1073 to 1085. Gregory's papacy was eventful. His most far-reaching act was to announce that the church was the only path to God. Every other church and faith was anathema. The church was supreme, according to Gregory, and the Pope himself was the highest possible human authority. Gregory, as the historian Malcolm Lambert notes, awakened in the laity a new sense of responsibility for reform and a higher expectation of moral standards from their clergy. A genie was unleashed which could never again be put back in the bottle. The moral life of the clergy became a rallying point for reformers, dissenters, and disaffected churchgoers. In the early years of the 12th century, this popular reformer zeal became even more strident. Charismatic, wandering preachers whipped up parishes and often whole towns into anti-clerical frenzy. Talchem of Antwerp, who was active in the Netherlands, inspired such fanatical devotion that his followers were said to drink his bathwater. He did not travel anywhere without an armed guard, a measure that proved futile, as Talchem was eventually stabbed by a priest. A rogue Benedict monk, Henry of Lausanne, caused huge unrest in Le Mans and effectively ousted the bishop. Peter of Worms was even more radical, inciting people to break into churches and destroy crucifixes. He held public burnings of crosses until Good Friday, 1139. A mob threw him onto one of his own bonfires. Arnold of Brescia was yet more extreme than Peter. He launched an attack on Rome in 1146 and declared it a republic. It was not until 1154 that the Pope was able to return to the Vatican. So they held that place for damn near 7 years. Arnold was burned at the stake. His ashes were scattered in the Tiber to prevent his disciples making them into relics. When you read this shit, do you realize, talk about a fucking cult. Like, the insanity of these cultish mindsets. It's insane. You know? It's insane. However, while the church was disposing of Arnold in Rome, an even more mysterious threat appeared far to the north on the banks of the Rhine. The first Cathars. Let's begin here. The Cathars first appear in the historical record in 1143. Eberwin, the prior of a Premonstratensian house of Seinfeld near Cologne, wrote to the great Cistercian reformer Bernard of Clairvaux that two heretical groups had been uncovered when they had been heard discussing a point of doctrine. These Cathars were brought before the Bishop of Cologne for a hearing. It was established that their church was organized in a 3-tier system of elect, believers, and listeners. They did not baptize with water, but through the laying on of hands. They condemned marriage, but Ebervin could not find out why, either because they dared not reveal it, or more probably they did not know. More anonymously, the Archbishop learned that the heresy had a very large number of adherents scattered throughout the world, and that it had lain concealed from the time of the martyrs even to their own day. Most of the heretics were persuaded to recant, although 2 of their numbers, apparently a bishop and a deacon, remained unrepentant after 3 days' intense debate with both clergy and laity. Before the sentence could be pronounced, an angry mob seized the 2 heretics and threw them into a fire. Holy fuck. When you look at these religions, there's never been peace. It's like you either had to fucking shut up and just do it their way, or your life was on the line. What was different about this new heresy was that it was not merely anti-clericalism of the sort propagated by Henry of Lausanne and the motley assortment of libertarians, preachers who had been such a colorful feature of religious life during the 12th century up to that point. Those new heretics had organized themselves properly. Indeed, the 2 groups discovered at Cologne were not merely dissenters from Catholicism. They were members of an underground church that had had a time to build itself up and put itself in direct opposition to Rome and all that it stood for. As Malcolm Lambert puts it, the Cathars offered a direct, headlong challenge to the Catholic Church, which it dismissed outright as the Church of Satan. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and suddenly the new heresy seemed to be everywhere. Its rise concerned no less a churchman than Bernard of Clairvaux, who, after receiving Ebervin's letter about events in the Rhineland and composed 2 sermons denouncing the heretics, he equated the heretics with the little foxes in the Song of Songs 2:15. Catch the foxes, the little foxes, before they ruin our vineyard in bloom. Bernard's tracts are full of the standard accusations. He warns of the heretics' cunning and secrecy and accuses them of sexual misconduct and aberration. As to what would be done without the situation, he comes close to condemning the burghers of Cologne, who had cast their Cathars into the flames. Their zeal in rooting out heresy we approve, but we do not advise the imitation of their action, because faith is to be produced by persuasion, not imposed by force. He goes on to add, however, that it would without a doubt be better that they should be coerced by the sword of him who beareth not the sword in vain, than that they should be allowed to draw away many other persons into their errors. In other words, he could tolerate people being quietly heretical at home, but they could not be allowed to seek out converts. As for punishment, the worst thing he advised as expulsion from the church, in light of what was happened in the Languedoc in the early years of the following century. Bernard's view are remarkably humane and tolerant. If the church had followed his lead, he was after all the most powerful figure in the church of his time, then history might have been different. So they're talking about when the Cathars rose. And I don't think they rose. I think that's a lie. Again, some of these books, you got to kind of think. Because when you look at what Freddy Silva talks about, the beginnings of the Knights Templars, which is in 1111, that's what killed me. When I first found out that they were actually formed in the year 1111, it was game over. I was like, okay, I'm paying attention. No way am I fucking going to ignore that. There's no way. So, remember when we talked about the fact that the Knights Templars, we thought they were slaughtered, but they were just repackaged and renamed by the King of Portugal? So, the Cathars was a new name. And they kept probably having to reinvent new names to survive. The Rome, the popes that, kept coming up. And for some reason, they got to become almost like, zealots. They were like kind of nutty, They're attacking people now. They're attacking deacons and bishops and, whatever, cardinals. And then suddenly they calmed down. And I don't think they calmed down. I think there were just some outliers, some rebellious nuts that decided that they'd take shit in their own hands. But the Cathars, if you really studied the Cathars, they were a very gentle people, a very, very gentle, loving people. But they honestly believed that the Catholic Church was the Church of Satan, swear to God. It's in every book I've read so far, that no one argues that point. So let me see what else is there. And it's interesting because, let me read this, hang on. Do you guys know who Hildegard of Bijan is? She was a mother superior, a nun, who was actually she was a mystic. She was a nun who was a mystic. She was an herbalist. She was a musician. You might want to look it up. It's Hildegard, and then you go of, Hildegard. Hopefully you know how to spell Hildegard. Bijan, B-I-N-G-E-N, okay? Look her up, because back in the late 90s, she was I swear to God, everyone was playing her music. It was wild. Everyone was playing her music. But anyway, listen to this. Hildegard had a nightmarish vision of the Cathars' emergence. It was taken by the church as a sign from God. So you got to understand, everyone's being brainwashed, and everyone, because of this fucking religion, no offense, everyone starts having anxiety. Everyone is afraid of each other. And there's this weird paranoia that turns into something almost savage, Okay, so let me continue, okay? The only prayer both churches used was the Lord's Prayer, with the Cathars substituting the phrase supersubstantial bread for daily bread. Bogomils and Cathars alike dismiss most of the Old Testament and its belligerent deity as satanic. Can you blame them? Have you ever read the Old Testament? Did you hear that? So they believed in the demiurge, obviously. And I personally believe that the God of the Old Testament was an Anunnaki. That's just my takeaway. I firmly believe in that. But let me continue. Its belligerent deity as satanic. Both movements regarded the entity of the Church, Catholic in the West, Orthodox in the East, as the Church of Satan, and rejected it utterly. Church buildings, the churches, chapels, and cathedrals themselves were likewise seen as no more holy than any other building. Neither sect built places of worship, preferring instead to meet in people's homes, in barns, in fields. Anti-dualistic propaganda produced at the time tells of a Bogomil monk who feigned orthodoxy and built a church on the banks of the Bosphorus, putting a latrine behind the altar in order to desecrate it. Similarly, in Toulouse, a Cathar was said to have entered a local church and emptied his bowels on the altar, cleaning himself up with the altar cloth. They fucking were pissed. I mean, pissed off. They were irreverent as shit. In both faiths, the cross was seen as the instruments of Christ's torture. Bogomils and Cathars refused to venerate it. They interpreted the Eucharistic allegory and took the docetic line on Christ's nature, his miracles, passions, and resurrections, believing them to be no more than apparitions. Cathars and Bogomils regarded marriage as fornication and saw it as a means by which souls became entrapped in the material world through the thoroughly distasteful business of childbirth. While there's still little or no evidence concerning the role of women in the Bogomil church, the Cathars regarded women as equal of men, and Catharism offered women the chance to participate fully in the faith of all levels. Did you hear that? Interesting. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we talked about, I believe it was one of the Viking greats. I think it was Leif or one of these guys. I forgot his name actually. But anyway, the Vikings, we know, have discovered America, right? When we know they traded, it's come out now that we found DNA in Native American indigenous DNA and some of the people, I believe, in Iceland. I believe I'm correct. Thereabouts. And so we know that the Vikings were incredible seafarers. Besides the Phoenicians, aka Carthaginians, Punicians, they were some of the great seafarers. But anyway, their pagan system, right, of being a Viking, a Norseman, where you have different connections with Valhalla and things of that nature. Their belief system brought equality to the women. And we were talking about the fact that in what they call paganism, pagan religions, whether it was from the north or whether it was in the Celtic, the Gauls, the Irish, and the Brits, the Breton, that the pagan ways ensured equality for women and ensured it. And when the new religion, Catholicism, came into play, it removed forthwith the ability for women to walk in equality, to have access to preaching the word of God, for example, things of that nature, being a warrior in battle, things of that nature. I mean, we know of Boudica in the story of the great Irish warrior whose children and herself were sexually assaulted, and she waged fucking war against the Romans and really destroyed. And honestly, we don't have any real data that says that the Romans found her and took her and captured her. We have to be careful because the Romans would often lie about, and sometimes they couldn't lie because there were too many witnesses. And when they would write the truth, like there's a great story where Scipio Africanus, he's one of the great commanders, generals for the Roman side, has a meeting with Hannibal Barca, the great Carthaginian general who crossed the Pyrenees with his elephants to capture Rome for 12 years. He held Rome for about 12 years, depending on who you read this from. Anyway, they met because finally the Carthaginian Senate would not send him any more money, any more troops, any more arms. And that's how he lost, due to jealousy on the side note. But anyway, so he meets Scipio Africanus and they have an amazing conversation. They're incredible respect for each other. And the story goes that when they took Carthage and they poured salt and vinegar to make sure that every rock would dissolve, that nothing of Carthage would ever survive. The story goes that Scipio Africanus basically left fucking Rome, basically walked, he self-exiled. He was so disgusted by the Roman system that and the injustice and the savagery that he basically self-exiled. So that's a story of great respect for Hannibal. And by the way, Hannibal, Alexander the Great, Patton, all of these guys are still studied, I'm sure, at West Point in terms of their strategies. But my point to you is that we have to constantly remember that the victors write the history. And recently, there's a guy called Mike Pompeo who's decided that it's going to be his raison d'être to go about making sure that people forget what happened to people in Gaza, for example. Forget. And so when we look at the Ethiopian connection that we barely know, when we look at the 13 month in a calendar rather than 12, when we look at all of the things that have been shifted and changed to do psychological mindfucks and other things to us little by little per incarnation after incarnation, because you have to understand some of these ancient families, they play the long fucking game. Not to mention these reptilian families believe that they will reincarnate back into their own clan. You understand? And so when they play the long game, they think they're going to come back inheriting it again and again and again, and they will recycle to reincarnate back into the same bloodline. You see? And so we are at the point where we have to realize, and some of you who have listened to me this long, if you've literally heard my entire life, then you were attracted because you probably had a past life as a Knights Templar. And you probably remember, and this is where I need you to step in. Because I knew that today I was going to read this, and I was scanning through the pages to see what I would like to read. And I want you to understand that if you listen to me, then you are Knights Templars, and one of you, or maybe all of you, and for you to go into meditations to remember the alchemical training that was taught to you, the things that you remembered about power, about alchemy. You understand? Because that's what we need. We need to remember our power from ancient timelines. You see? And some timelines, like I have a timeline that's pretty ancient as a warrior, okay, that I actually remembered through hypnosis. And that timeline, though I wrote it down, whatever, because I have to, isn't in its full potency. Do you know why? Because I wanted to die for glory. Right there, I lose. Do you understand? My ego was all about, it was almost like Achilles in Troy when his mother says to him, you can have a beautiful life with a beautiful woman and have children, and they'll remember you, and then eventually you will be forgotten, or you go into this battle and you will be remembered throughout the ages. And he chose his ego, obviously. And so similarly, something like that, I had chosen this concept of dying in battle, and it was pretty fucking old. It was like maybe 5,000-6,000 years ago. And that's not a life worth really using as a tapping to power. But a Knights Templar life in 1111, 1126, yeah, that's worth it, because they are magical priests, because they are shamans, because they remember things that the Catholic Church thought as a massive threat. Do you understand? Because while they live and thrive, so were the Cathars. And that actually, their concurrent power in Europe, Italy, France, Portugal, Spain, was influencing a lot of people away from the Catholic Church, because they were showing and teaching beautiful esoteric truths about manifestation, about thought become matter, about God knows what else. God knows. And they had to be annihilated. They had to be, because they were teaching things that only these reptilians wanted to, and I'm going to use that term not like literally, but like consciously. They have a reptilian mindset of greed. It's never enough. And my friend and I were talking about the Vikings, who weren't really aggressors until they were aggressed upon. So whenever the Brits, who were, again, knee-deep in Catholicism, right, they would constantly attack the Norwegian people, the Swedish people, that part of the world. They were constantly attacking them because they wanted them to bend the knee to the new religion. And so that's what this was all about. It was never really about, leave me the fuck alone. You do what you want to do. You do you, boo, and I'll do me. We're good. Leave me the fuck alone. It was never about that. It was like never fucking enough. And there are certain pockets of ancient peoples who, for some reason, must have been more in line with the Anunnaki God. And they were just a bloodthirsty fucking people. And then there were people like us who were a peaceful, loving people, and we just wanted to be left the fuck alone to pray the way we wanted to pray. And we wanted to remember ourselves, remember where we came from. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to pull a card to see what the message is, okay, for you guys. And, but I can't recommend this book, anything you buy from Freddy Silva is magic. Anything. He's an amazing, it's like one of the best scholars you'll ever come across. He's the real deal. Hang on for a quick second, and let me see what I can find for a message. And I think I'm going to look at Lightworker, because we all have our parts to play, right? And so this is from Alana Fairchild, and I'm going to pull out a card. I'm not going to really ask you to pick this time. I'm going to pick, and I want to know what the message is. I'm going to go middle. Okay, here we go. This is called the fifth ray. It's 42, which is 7, which is Neptune, connected to the journey, the 7 wonders of the world. Fifth ray of knowledge, of intellectual knowledge is what it says. Fifth ray of intellectual knowledge. Let me read this. This is interesting. So it's 42. Hang on for a quick second. Okay, and of course the fucking writing is tiny as hell, so bear with me. The fifth ray of intellectual knowledge has come to you as a spiritual gift. You are being given the ability to find information you need, understand systems that impact your life, and find clarity in any issue that has seemed unclear or overwhelming. You shall sort the truth from the lies and learn what you need to know. The Archangel Raphael now assists you in integrating the blessing of the fifth ray. You are distilling a new truth. It might be the truth of discernment, where you realize the appearance of a person, group, or cause is misleadingly different from the inner reality. Discernment is incredibly important on the spiritual path, all the more so as you open up to work with energies, with teachers and teachings, and to sort out all issues in your life according to your spiritual principles. Discernment is not judgment, but it does allow you to make informed decisions based on frequency. When you choose to associate with people who are on a higher frequency, everyone benefits. If you choose to associate with people on a lower frequency than your own, you may feel your life moving more slowly, becoming harder than it needs to be. Discernment helps you navigate through illusions and find the real gems. It helps you step back from those who say they want to support you, but who actually just want to take and not give in return. The fifth ray helps you choose wisely and sever unhealthy connections. This ray also comes to you when there is more to something than meets the eye. You will be given the power to discover and understand the truth. Wait until the truth clicks inside you. Until then, keep looking deeper until you unravel the mystery. The fifth ray will help you to do so successfully. The challenge with the fifth ray is to remain open-minded as you find your clarity. Be willing to find more information if you need it. The right answers will come, but be willing to change your viewpoint in order to perceive the truth of the matter. If a system is working for you, that's great. If it needs to be changed, don't be afraid to go into the chaos of creativity and try different ways until you discover what will work better for you now. The fifth ray has a special connection to the worlds of science. Therefore, you are encouraged to be an observer in your life, to experience with what does and does not work for you. You are invited to pursue any form of science that is of interest to you, whether this be learning nutritional science or quantum physics, the chemical composition and healing benefits of essential oils, or researching meditation and healing. If these are not of your interest for you, it could be simply the application of scientific mindset in your life. In that case, become methodical in areas that can benefit from systems, habits, and structures that replicate desired results. Apply this approach to your exercise regime, your meditation practice, and any other aspects of your lifestyle that maximizes your potential and supports your best possible life path. Invocation. I now accept of my own free will the blessing and grace of the fifth ray of intellectual knowledge. I call upon the grace and assistance of the universe and Archangel Raphael to help me discern truth and find the information and understanding that will enable me to find peace and experience penetrating insight in my life. I am thankful for the gifts of intelligence and understanding that help me live my best life in service to love. May knowledge serve the liberation of all beings through unconditional love and divine mercy, through my own free will. So it is. I love this for you because we just went down the rabbit hole of the Knights Templars and read from a point of view never, and he's very humble, by the way, but even he had to admit that the way the Knights Templars have been researched and promoted wasn't accurate. It was not accurate at all. And that was important for him to do this work. And the fact that he could translate these documents in Portugal. I mean, he went back to Portugal and really went into the, I guess, probably the records kept in libraries and the records kept in probably cathedrals, churches, whatever. And he was able to, excavate for, unknown truths. But again, all I have to say is 11/11. I mean, of all it could have been any freaking year. It could have been 11/12, 11/10. It was 11/11 when the Knights Templars formed. It's insane. So there is something pretty magical. I have to say, I've never heard anything bad about Portugal. Never. I'm not kidding. Never anything bad. So there's got to be something. There's got to be some ley lines. There must have been a reason why they went to Portugal to. Well, I mean, they were part of forming that country into a country, which is extraordinary, in my opinion. And it's also interesting to me because if you notice the Knights Templars, there's no sexism, right? There's no misogyny, and there's no racism. They're going to Ethiopia, for example, and they're like understanding all of these differences. And for them, it's not something to judge or to look their nose down on. It's just another people with different approaches to life, and they look a little different than us. But yeah, let's look at that. Let's look at what wisdoms they have that we need to understand. There's no supremacy. That was something the Catholic Church promoted: supremacy, misogyny, and racism in its rank. But again, I'm always, I'm somewhat obsessed, I've got to admit, with what's in that library in the Vatican. Because it's not only them, okay, it's not only the work of the Cathars that they probably stole, but also what the Knights Templars brought back, scrolls, like I said, relics, things of that nature, magical probably relics, but I also look at when the last time there was an Alexandria type library, which would have been around I believe it was 450 AD, whereas you heard Freddy Silva talk about how the Christian mob went fucking apeshit in Alexandria, and they ripped apart Hypatia. I mean, tore from limb to limb, literally. And there's a movie I've been mentioning that movie for so long. Oh my God, I forgot the title of the movie. But anyway, it's based on Hypatia and what happened. But you see, there's a scene where the high priests and high priestesses and teachers and whatever you want to call them, students, are freaking the fuck out, going, no, take that scroll. No, not that one. Leave that one behind. No, take that. And they're trying to move all the ancient writings out before the Christians come to fucking destroy everything. Before that was Octavius when he took over Egypt. And the story goes that he burned down Alexandria. Alexandria went through 2 burnings in the BC era. 2 burnings, maybe 3, but definitely 2 that I remember. And one was an accidental burning that was pre-Cleopatra. And then the last burning supposedly was with Octavius, Emperor Octavius, who was the nephew of Caesar. And he comes in, but knowing his personality, like reading about him, seeing little shows on him and screenplays and shit like that, and how people view Octavius, I don't think he would have just burned the Alexandria down without taking some shit. Probably he ransacked, I would say he ransacked the library, took all the knowledge. Because the Egyptians were famous, the Greeks made them famous for their incredible knowledge of everything, fucking everything. And the Greeks were copied by the Romans, and people know that. So the Romans would have walked in saying, yeah, I want this, I want that. Kind of like what happened to Baghdad Museum when they walked in and fucking ransacked that museum and took all these relics. And I always think about, that shit's got to be in the Vatican. It's got to be in the Vatican. There's no fucking way. It's got to be there. So there's knowledge. And it's interesting too, because if you were ever going to teach yourself how to be a remote viewer, certainly not to spy on someone, to say, oh yeah, he's cheating on you with Joe Blow Bobby. If you were ever going to be a remote viewer, I would say it would be awesome to remote view and walk through the Vatican Library. Swear to God. That would be, to me, to train to do that. Yes, definitely. To train to look at what happened to our planet in various stages of supposed, this is what happened in historical context, but you're getting kind of like triggered going, yeah, that's a fucking lie. I know that's not what happened. Then remote viewing to go back into time would be brilliant. But to remote view to do stupid shit for the ego, you're going to get hurt. But to remote view to understand truth, that would be the right reason to train yourself to remote view. If I was ever going to do that, I would do it for that. Even what happened to Yeshua. What happened to Yeshua? Right? What happened to Yeshua? Did they get him out of that fucking crypt? Did they carry him out? Did they tell a story? Did she have to look like everything was just fine? And then they fucking, got the fuck out of, the Holy Land. What exactly happened? That is worth training yourself as a remote viewer to figure it out. I'll tell you that. But it's not to fucking sell your services for some bimbo that wants to know if her husband or her wife is cheating on her. No. By the way, it's a big no-no. But anyway, I hope you had fun. I thought it was fun. And sending you much love on your journey. And I'll have this on YouTube until this is no longer TikTok. You'll see me here for a while. All right. Namaste. Be well.